What would you do if your own neighbor, the one who runs your HOA, was secretly stealing your electricity every night, and when you caught them, they turned the entire neighborhood against you? The first time Tobias Green saw his electric bill, he thought there had to be a mistake. The number on the page didn't just creep up. It jumped, soaring almost $200 higher than what he usually paid. At first, he blamed his kids for leaving lights on, or maybe the dryer working overtime. But after double-checking, nothing lined up. His family's habits hadn't changed, his home office ran on the same setup, and his plug-in SUV hadn't been charging more often than usual. Still, the bill told a different story. That sinking feeling in his stomach wouldn't leave him alone. Tobias, a 41-year-old systems analyst living in a suburb of Charlotte, prided himself on keeping things in order. He had a good eye for patterns. It was literally his job. And something here screamed that someone, or something, was draining him. He started checking the numbers every night like clockwork, jotting them down in a notepad. By the end of the week, the pattern was undeniable. Power was being pulled when he wasn't even awake. One night, Tobias stepped out onto his driveway just after midnight. The air was still, and most of the houses on his street had gone dark hours ago. Yet his charging station's indicator light blinked faintly, like it was in use. He unplugged his own car before bed. So how was it drawing power? He ran his hand across the cable, still faintly warm. Someone had been here. He didn't want to believe it at first. Neighbors were supposed to look out for each other, not sneak around in the dead of night. But Tobias wasn't the type to jump to conclusions without proof. If someone was bold enough to steal his electricity, then he was going to catch them in the act. The following morning, Tobias picked up a small motion-activated camera from a hardware store in Rock Hill. It wasn't anything fancy, but it would do the job. He set it up facing the driveway, angled perfectly toward the charging outlet. That night, he sat inside with his laptop, pretending to work. Though his mind wasn't on the screen, he felt like a guard posted on watch. When the footage loaded the next day, his stomach tightened. There, in the grainy black-and-white video, was his neighbor, Priscilla Hensley. She wasn't some teenager pulling a prank or a stranger passing through. She lived right across the street, in the 2-story brick house with the manicured hedges and HOA flyers taped to the mailbox. At 56, she carried herself with the stiff, commanding air of someone used to telling others what to do. And yet there she was, crouched by his driveway, calmly plugging her Tesla into his charger as if it belonged to her. Tobias replayed the clip 3 times, hardly able to believe it. Each second filled him with a mix of anger and disbelief. She didn't look rushed, guilty, or even nervous. She acted like she had every right to be there. When she finally walked back across the street, she didn't even glance around. That arrogance burned Tobias more than the theft itself. He told himself maybe it was a one-time thing, but the camera didn't lie. Night after night, there she was again. Same routine, same entitled stride, draining his power while her own driveway sat empty. Tobias could almost feel the money leaving his bank account as he watched her car sit there for hours. Sleep didn't come easy after that. He tossed and turned, picturing her smug face every time he opened his mailbox and saw another bill. His wife, Marlene, suggested they talk to her politely, maybe bring it up in a calm way. But Tobias knew Priscilla. Everyone in the neighborhood did. She wasn't just a neighbor. She was the HOA treasurer, the one who handed out warnings for grass that grew half an inch too tall or trash bins that stayed on the curb too long. Confronting her meant opening a door he wasn't sure he could close. Yet the thought of doing nothing gnawed at him. Tobias wasn't a man who liked conflict, but he also wasn't going to be walked over. Every time he pulled into his driveway, he felt eyes on him from across the street, as if she was daring him to say something. He told himself he'd wait until the next bill came. If it spiked again, he'd have no choice but to confront her. But even as he tried to convince himself to wait, he knew the truth. The line had already been crossed. But Tobias had no idea just how ugly things were about to get once he decided to confront her face to face. Tobias didn't waste time. The following week, he kept the motion camera running every night, stacking up clips that left no doubt. This wasn't a misunderstanding, and it wasn't an accident. Priscilla Hensley had turned his charging station into her personal power source. Sometimes she came over just before midnight, other times closer to 2 in the morning. She always wore the same expression, calm and deliberate, like plugging her Tesla into his outlet was the most natural thing in the world. The more Tobias watched, the angrier he got. He remembered all the times she had written notes on neighbors' doors, nitpicking about lawn decorations or holiday lights. She was relentless about rules when it suited her, yet here she was, stealing power like it was free candy. By Friday, Tobias couldn't hold it in anymore. He printed still shots from the video, slid them into a folder, and walked across the street. His hands felt clammy as he rang her doorbell. A chime echoed, and after a moment, Priscilla opened the door. She was wearing a light sweater draped over her shoulders, her hair pulled back in a bun. She looked surprised to see him, but only for a second. Then that familiar look of superiority washed over her face. "Tobias," she said smoothly, as if she'd been expecting him. "What brings you over?" "I think you already know," he said, keeping his voice steady. He handed her the folder. "I've been having some issues with my electric bill, so I set up a camera." Priscilla flipped through the photos, her face unreadable. For a moment, Tobias thought maybe she'd apologize, maybe she'd act embarrassed. Instead, she closed the folder and handed it back with a faint smirk. "You're being dramatic," she said. "This is a community. Resources are meant to be shared. You've got a charger just sitting out there. I figured you wouldn't mind." Tobias felt his jaw tighten. "Wouldn't mind? You're stealing my electricity, Priscilla. That's not sharing. That's theft." Her expression hardened. "Watch your words. And remember who keeps this neighborhood running. Without the HOA, you wouldn't have the clean streets, the property values, the safety we all enjoy. If you're going to nitpick about a little electricity, maybe we should revisit whether your driveway setup is even compliant. Those wires, those fixtures, do you even have approval for that?" There it was. The threat. Not even subtle. "I don't need approval to charge my own car." Tobias shot back. "And you don't get to bully me with HOA nonsense just because you got caught red-handed." For the first time, a flicker of irritation crossed her face. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Careful, Tobias. I'd hate for you to make this bigger than it needs to be. Let's just call it even." He shook his head. "No, it ends tonight. Don't touch my outlet again." For a moment, they locked eyes, the tension thick as concrete. Then Priscilla smiled faintly, like she knew something he didn't. "We'll see," she said, and closed the door. Tobias walked back across the street, folder tucked under his arm. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from fury. She hadn't even tried to deny it. She acted like she owned the place, like his driveway was hers to manage. That smug grin stuck in his mind the rest of the night. Later, as he sat in his living room replaying their conversation, his wife asked softly, "Do you think she'll stop?" He didn't answer right away. Deep down, he knew the truth. Someone like Priscilla didn't back down because they got caught. If anything, she'd double down, convinced she could outmaneuver him. And that thought gnawed at him more than the bills ever could. Sure enough, the next morning, Tobias checked the camera footage. There she was again, crouching by the charger at 1:30 in the morning. He slammed his fist on the table, waking his teenage son upstairs. She wasn't just stealing. She was daring him to do something about it. Tobias paced the living room for an hour, his mind running in circles. He could go to the police, but what would he say? His neighbor plugged into his outlet. Would they even take that seriously? He could take it to the HOA board, but she was the treasurer. That meant she had allies, leverage, and influence. He pictured her laughing about it at the next meeting, spinning the story to make him look paranoid. No, Tobias thought. If this was going to end, he had to handle it himself. He couldn't rely on anyone else. But that decision came with a heavy weight. Standing up to Priscilla wasn't just about a charger anymore. It was about respect, about not letting someone walk over him in his own home. He sat down at his desk, staring at the footage one more time. Priscilla, in her sweater and neat shoes, moving with the confidence of someone who believed rules didn't apply to her. He felt his pulse quicken. If she thought she could keep doing this without consequence, she was wrong. But Tobias had no idea that confronting her once wasn't enough, because Priscilla was about to push even harder, and the fight between them was only just beginning. Tobias barely slept that weekend. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Priscilla's face, that smug smirk when she told him, "We'll see." It wasn't just the theft anymore, it was the disrespect, the brazen way she dismissed him, like he was a child throwing a tantrum. He knew she wasn't going to stop, and the longer he stayed silent, the more power she had over him. By Monday evening, he decided enough was enough. He was going to confront her again, but this time in the open, where the neighborhood could see. Maybe if she felt the weight of witnesses, she'd finally back down. The chance came sooner than expected. As Tobias returned home from work, he noticed Priscilla standing at the curb, chatting with two other neighbors, Roger Kim, who lived next door to Tobias, and Donna Myers from around the corner. Tobias could tell by the way they glanced at him that she was already spinning some kind of story. He parked his SUV, got out, and walked straight toward them. His heart was pounding, but his voice came out steady. "Priscilla, we need to talk." She turned, her smile tight. "Oh, Tobias." Perfect timing. "We were just discussing the HOA guidelines for outdoor fixtures. Did you know there's been concern about safety hazards with certain setups?" Tobias felt the heat rising in his chest. "Cut the act. You've been stealing my electricity for weeks. I have you on camera, night after night, plugging your car into my outlet. Don't stand here and pretend like it's about safety." Roger shifted uncomfortably, while Donna's eyes widened. Priscilla, on the other hand, didn't flinch. She crossed her arms and tilted her head. "Stealing. That's a harsh word. I told you before, this is a community. Sharing resources is part of being a good neighbor. Maybe instead of throwing accusations, you should consider how selfish you sound." "Selfish?" Tobias snapped. "My family's paying for your car to run. You cost me hundreds of dollars, and you're calling me selfish?" Donna jumped in, trying to calm things down. "Maybe there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding." Tobias cut her off. He looked right at Roger. "I have video proof. She knows exactly what she's doing." Roger rubbed the back of his neck. "That doesn't sound right, Priscilla." "If he has proof..." Priscilla shot him a sharp look, silencing him. Then she leaned closer to Tobias, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "You really want to go to war with me? Think about that carefully. I know every bylaw, every technicality. You've got a makeshift setup on your driveway. One complaint, and I can bury you in violations. Your wife will hate it. Your kids will feel the tension. You want that?" Tobias stared at her, his fists clenched. He wanted to shout, to drag her in front of the whole neighborhood and show them the footage. But he could see the calculation in her eyes. She wasn't bluffing. She thrived on these fights, on bending rules to her advantage. Still, he refused to back down. "Do what you want. But if you plug into my outlet again, I'll take this straight to the police, and I'll hand them every clip I've got." Her expression shifted, just slightly, before she plastered on a smile and raised her voice for the others to hear. "Well, isn't this dramatic? Tobias seems convinced I'm sneaking around his property. Let's hope he doesn't waste anyone's time with silly accusations." With that, she turned on her heel and walked back toward her house, leaving Roger and Donna standing awkwardly in the street. Tobias exhaled hard, his hands still trembling. Roger gave him a sympathetic look. "She's tough to deal with. But if you've got proof, maybe you should really file a report. People are tired of her antics." Donna nodded, lowering her voice. "She's been like this for years. Always threatening fines, always acting superior. If you're the one to finally stand up to her, don't back down." Tobias thanked them, but the moment he walked inside his house, the weight returned. Confronting her publicly hadn't solved anything. If anything, it made things worse. She knew now that he was serious, and she wasn't the type to retreat quietly. Later that night, his wife found him staring at the latest electric bill. "You can't let her keep doing this," Marlene said. "But you also can't let her drag you into some endless fight. You have to be smart." He rubbed his temples. "She's daring me, March. She thinks I won't push back because she's the HOA treasurer. But if I don't, she's just going to keep walking all over us." His wife placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then don't let her. But be careful. People like her don't stop until they're forced to." Tobias nodded slowly. He knew she was right. He couldn't keep trading words with Priscilla. The time for talking was over. But what Tobias didn't realize was that Priscilla had no intention of stopping, and her arrogance was about to push him to a breaking point. The days that followed felt heavier than usual for Tobias. Every time he backed his SUV into the driveway, he could feel Priscilla's eyes from across the street, staring from behind her lace curtains. She didn't hide it. In fact, she wanted him to know she was watching. It was a silent taunt, a way of saying, "I'm not done with you." By Wednesday night, his fears were confirmed. At 1:30 in the morning, his camera caught her again. Priscilla, wrapped in her sweater, creeping across the street to his driveway. She glanced around briefly, then crouched and plugged her Tesla into his outlet like nothing had ever happened between them. The sheer nerve of it sent Tobias pacing his living room in circles. When he told his wife the next morning, Marlene shook her head in disbelief. "She's not even trying to stop? After you confronted her in front of the neighbors?" "She doesn't think I'll do anything," Tobias said, his voice tight. "She thinks she's untouchable because of her HOA position. It wasn't just about the bills anymore. It was about dignity. Each time she drained his power, it felt like she was reaching into his pocket, daring him to slap her hand away. The longer he stayed passive, the smaller he felt in his own home." That Friday, Tobias returned home to find an official-looking envelope tucked under his doormat. His stomach dropped as he unfolded it. It was a notice from the HOA, signed by Priscilla herself, citing him for unauthorized exterior equipment and giving him 30 days to remove his charger or face fines. The letter boiled his blood. She had twisted the confrontation into ammunition, using her position to punish him for standing up to her. The hypocrisy was staggering. She had no issue leeching off his charger, but now it was suddenly unauthorized. That evening, Tobias stormed across the street, letter in hand. He pounded on her door until she opened, feigning surprise. "Why am I getting notices from the HOA about my charger?" he demanded. Priscilla raised an eyebrow. "Because, Tobias, rules are rules. If you didn't submit proper approval forms, then technically your setup violates community standards. I can't make exceptions." "You've been using it every night!" His voice cracked with outrage. "Don't act like you care about the rules." "This is nothing but retaliation." Her smirk widened. "Careful, Tobias. Accusations like that can get you in trouble. Maybe it's time you accept that being part of a community means compromise. If you can't handle that, maybe this neighborhood isn't a good fit for you." That last line hit like a punch. She was trying to push him out, make life so unbearable that he'd either back down or move away. Tobias leaned in, his eyes locked on hers. "You're not going to bully me out of my own house. And you're sure as hell not going to keep stealing from me." Priscilla's expression flickered, just briefly, before she let out a soft laugh and closed the door in his face. When Tobias returned home, Marlene was waiting. "What did she say?" "That she wants me gone," he muttered, dropping the letter onto the kitchen counter. "She thinks she can use the HOA as her weapon, but I'm done playing by her rules." His teenage son, Malik, overheard from the living room. "Dad, why don't you just report her to the cops?" "You have video. That's theft," Tobias sighed. "Because she'll spin it, make it about me. And until the cops actually see her stealing in person, it's my word against hers. Trust me, she knows how to play the system." His son frowned. "So what are you going to do?" Tobias didn't answer right away. He stared at the footage on his laptop screen. Priscilla hunched at his outlet, her face calm, almost smug. The solution didn't come instantly, but a seed began to form in his mind. If she wouldn't stop, maybe it was time to make sure she couldn't. The next morning, Tobias drove to an electronics supply store in Gastonia. He asked the clerk about surge protection systems, ones designed to cut power when unauthorized use was detected. The clerk raised an eyebrow, but showed him a heavy-duty setup. Tobias bought it without hesitation, his resolve hardening with every mile back home. As he installed it later that weekend, he felt a strange calm settle over him. This wasn't about revenge. It was about drawing a line, about reclaiming control. He had been pushed, prodded, and mocked long enough. If Priscilla thought she could keep draining his outlet, she was in for a shock. But Tobias had no idea that his quiet act of defense would soon ignite a storm bigger than he ever expected. Tobias spent most of Saturday in his garage. Tools now spread across the workbench, instructions pinned under his elbow. He had never considered himself particularly handy, but his background in systems analysis gave him patience and an eye for detail. And this wasn't just some weekend project. This was war prep. The surge safeguard looked simple enough on the box, but once he opened it, the guts of wires, breakers, and circuit boards made it clear. One wrong move and he'd fry his own SUV. Still, Tobias pressed on. He wanted a system that would recognize when his car wasn't connected and instantly cut off power. More than that, he wanted it to overload if anyone tried to bypass the setup. He wasn't aiming to destroy anything, but if consequences came, so be it. By late afternoon, sweat streaked his forehead and the floor was littered with wire clippings. He tightened the final screw, stepped back, and exhaled. The charger now had a hidden safeguard, invisible to anyone casually plugging in. Marlene walked into the garage, arms folded. "You've been at this all day." "Are you sure this is safe?" "As safe as it needs to be," Tobias said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Look, I'm not trying to hurt anyone, but she's left me no choice. Every bill, every threat, every smug look. It ends now." His wife studied him, worry in her eyes. "You're different lately. You used to laugh more. Now all I see is anger." Tobias leaned against the workbench. "It's not just about me. It's about all of us. If she gets away with this, what's next? Telling us what cars we can drive, what colors we can paint our house? I'm not living under her thumb." Later that night, Tobias tested the system with his SUV. He plugged it in, waited for the green light, and then unplugged it to simulate tampering. The moment he did, the safeguard tripped, cutting the circuit with a sharp click. Success. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of control. But his satisfaction was short-lived, because control, he knew, only mattered if Priscilla tried again. That chance came sooner than he thought. Sunday evening, Tobias sat in his living room with the camera feed open on his laptop. He'd developed the habit of keeping it on like background noise, always watching, always waiting. At 12:47 a.m., movement flickered across the screen. There she was, Priscilla, striding across the street in her cardigan, Tesla key fob clutched in her hand. Tobias's chest tightened. His wife stirred beside him on the couch, but he motioned for her to stay quiet. Together they watched as Priscilla knelt at the charger, glancing around briefly before plugging in. For a split second, the light on her Tesla flickered green. Then the safeguard tripped. On the camera feed, her head jerked up. She pulled the cable out, shoved it back in, then pulled it again. Tobias couldn't hear her from inside, but he imagined the curses spilling from her lips. The next moment was almost surreal. A faint spark flashed near the base of her charger port. She recoiled, staring in disbelief. Seconds later, the Tesla's system shut down entirely. No lights, no response. Just dead silence. Marlene covered her mouth, eyes wide. "Did you see that?" Tobias leaned closer to the screen, heart pounding. It worked. Outside, Priscilla stood frozen for a long moment, staring at her car like it had betrayed her. Finally, she yanked the plug free and stomped back across the street, her face twisted in fury. Her Tesla remained parked at the curb, lifeless. Tobias exhaled, a mix of relief and adrenaline flooding through him. He had taken back his ground, not with fists or shouting, but with quiet, calculated action. For the first time in weeks, he slept through the night. But morning brought a different kind of storm. At 8 a.m., a tow truck pulled up outside Priscilla's house. Tobias stood at his window as two men in uniforms hooked chains to her Tesla. She came outside in her robe, yelling about warranties and failures, but the men just shrugged, telling her to call the dealership. The whole scene played out in front of half the neighborhood. Phones recorded, curtains twitched, whispers began to spread. Marlene placed a hand on his arm. "It's starting." She didn't need to say more. Tobias could already feel it in the air. This wasn't over. If anything, it had only escalated. But Tobias didn't realize how quickly the neighborhood would turn into a battlefield, with every whispered opinion turning into open sides. By Monday evening, everyone in the subdivision had heard about Priscilla's Tesla, a story that started with a tow truck rumbling down the street quickly ballooned into gossip passed over backyard fences, in hushed tones at mailboxes, and even through text chains among the residents. For once, the woman who normally held all the power in the HOA meetings was on the receiving end of whispers. From his porch, Tobias overheard two neighbors walking their dogs' paws near his driveway. "Did you see Priscilla this morning?" "Car wouldn't even start. Had to get it hauled out," one said. "About time she got a taste of her own medicine," the other muttered. "She's been riding people for years." Tobias sipped his coffee, pretending not to listen, but inside he felt a guilty satisfaction. It wasn't that he wanted her to suffer, he just wanted her to stop stealing from him. And maybe, just maybe, this would finally shut her down. But Priscilla wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. That evening, as Tobias was watering the hedges, she stormed across the street. Her expression was sharper than broken glass, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You think this is funny, don't you?" she snapped. Tobias set the hose down slowly. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her voice rose, shrill and cutting. "Don't play games with me, Tobias. My Tesla's battery is fried, and it just so happens right after your little confrontation with me. You tampered with your charger, didn't you?" He stared at her, unflinching. "Priscilla, the only person who tampered with my charger was you. You had no business using it, and now you're paying the price." Her eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." For a moment, Tobias thought she might lunge at him, but instead she spun on her heel and stormed back to her house. The very next day, a new notice showed up in his mailbox. This one accused him of endangering the community by installing hazardous equipment and warned of an emergency HOA review meeting. He crumpled the letter in his hand, his jaw tight. It was exactly as he feared. She was going to weaponize the HOA against him. That night at dinner, his teenage son Malik broke the silence. "Dad, people at the bus stop were talking about it. Some of the kids said their parents think you set a trap for her car." Marlene shot Tobias a worried glance. "It's spreading then." Tobias shook his head. "I didn't trap her car. I protected my own property." She made her choice. Malik leaned forward. "But if she's telling everyone you did it on purpose, people are going to believe her. You know how she is. She'll twist the story until you're the villain." Tobias gripped his fork but didn't answer. The truth was, he already felt the shift in the air. While some neighbors avoided eye contact, others offered him tight smiles of support. Lines were being drawn, and no one was neutral anymore. The following morning proved it. As Tobias headed to his car, Donna Myers waved him down. "Hey, I just wanted you to know," she whispered, glancing toward Priscilla's house. "You're not alone. Half this neighborhood is sick of her. She's used the HOA like a hammer for years. People are quietly cheering for you." Tobias managed a small nod. "Thanks, Donna. I appreciate it." But just as Donna walked away, Roger Kim emerged from his porch across the street, his expression cautious. "Tobias," he called out, lowering his voice as he approached. "Be careful. Priscilla's telling everyone you sabotaged her Tesla. She's already drafting a formal complaint. If this gets ugly, she could actually cost you more than a few fines. She's got connections." Tobias sighed. "I figured as much, but I'm not letting her bully me. Not anymore." Roger frowned, looking unconvinced. "Just watch your back, all right?" That night, Tobias sat at his desk, scrolling through footage of Priscilla sneaking across his driveway. Each clip was a reminder, proof of her arrogance and theft. If she wanted a fight, fine. He had the evidence, but evidence didn't always matter when someone like Priscilla was the one holding the gavel. Out the window, he saw her porch light flick on. She stepped outside, phone pressed to her ear, pacing the walkway with sharp, deliberate strides. Tobias didn't need to hear her words to know. She wasn't letting this go. But while Tobias braced himself for an HOA battle, he didn't realize the bigger storm was the neighborhood itself, where loyalties were shifting fast, and his fight with Priscilla was about to pull everyone else in. By midweek, the neighborhood had split clean down the middle. On one side were the quiet supporters, folks who had their own stories of Priscilla's harassment, Neighbors who had been fined for garden flags, basketball hoops, or kids' bikes left on the sidewalk. They whispered encouragement to Tobias at the mailbox, gave subtle nods when passing his driveway, and some even left anonymous notes in his mailbox saying things like, "Finally, someone stood up to her." On the other side were the loyalists, the ones who thrived under Priscilla's strict order or feared being her next target. They muttered as Tobias walked by, crossed the street to avoid him, and clucked their tongues at the sight of his charger. To them, Priscilla wasn't just a neighbor. She was the self-appointed guardian of their property values. Tobias could feel the tension every time he stepped outside. Conversations stopped when he approached, curtains shifted in upstairs windows, and even kids seemed hesitant to ride their bikes past his driveway. What had started as one woman's arrogance was now a neighborhood drama, pulling everyone into its orbit. The fire really spread during the HOA's emergency review meeting, held in the community center off Providence Road. The parking lot was jammed, and the air inside buzzed with heated chatter. Tobias sat near the front, folder of video footage at his feet, while Priscilla stood at the podium in a sharp blazer, her voice ringing through the microphone. "This community has always valued order, safety, and respect for our guidelines," she declared. But recently that respect has been undermined. A resident has installed unapproved equipment that has endangered not just property, but lives. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Tobias clenched his fists. She was already twisting the story. When it was his turn to speak, he rose, his voice steady despite the nerves crawling up his spine. "I'm not here to argue about bylaws. I'm here to talk about theft. For weeks, Mrs. Hensley came onto my property in the middle of the night to use my charger without permission. I have video evidence. This isn't about community safety. It's about her abuse of power." Gasps echoed as Tobias laid the printed stills on the table, clear shots of Priscilla crouched at his outlet. For the first time that evening, her expression faltered. Someone in the back called out, "So all this was true?" Another voice shouted, "She's been fining people for years while breaking the rules herself." Priscilla banged her hand on the podium. "That footage proves nothing. Maybe I was checking for a hazard. Maybe I was—" "Plugging your Tesla in at 1 in the morning?" Tobias interrupted. "You weren't inspecting anything. You were stealing. And when I confronted you, you threatened me with bogus violations. This isn't leadership, it's bullying." The room erupted. Some residents clapped, others jeered, and a handful muttered angrily about Tobias setting a trap. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. The division was clear. This wasn't a simple HOA dispute anymore. It was a full-blown standoff. After the meeting adjourned in chaos, Tobias stepped outside into the humid night air. Several neighbors gathered around him, offering quiet words of support. About time someone held her accountable. She's been riding us all for too long. But as he walked to his car, others glared openly. One man muttered, "You cost her thousands of dollars." "Don't act like you're some hero." Marlene placed a hand on Tobias's arm as they slid into their SUV. "You knew this was going to happen. She's not going to back down, and now the whole neighborhood is split." Tobias started the engine, staring at the dashboard. "I don't care if she backs down. I care that people finally see her for who she is." Still, as they drove home, he couldn't shake the knot in his stomach. Exposing Priscilla had felt like a victory in the moment, but the reality was more complicated. He had cracked her armor, yes, but in doing so he had drawn a target on his back. That night, while reviewing footage again, Tobias noticed something strange. For the first time in weeks, Priscilla hadn't stepped foot on his property. Instead, her lights stayed on until nearly 3 in the morning, shadows pacing across her living room curtains. She was plotting something, he could feel it. But Tobias didn't realize that the fallout wasn't just about him and Priscilla anymore, because the HOA fight was about to spiral into a neighborhood war, one that would test everyone's loyalties. By the next week, the subdivision no longer felt like a quiet row of suburban houses. It felt like 2 opposing camps separated by driveways and fences. The air was charged not with friendliness, but with suspicion. Tobias could feel it when he pulled into his driveway after work. Some neighbors waved warmly, others turned their backs. And at the center of it all was Priscilla Hensley, who seemed more determined than ever to wield her position like a weapon. On Tuesday morning, Tobias found 3 new HOA notices taped to his mailbox. One claimed his hedges were overgrown by more than the allowable 2 inches. Another cited a decorative violation for a small garden gnome his daughter had placed by the front steps. The third accused him of leaving his trash bins visible for more than 24 hours, even though it was pickup day. He yanked the papers down, jaw clenched. Marlene joined him at the door. "She's piling it on now, trying to drown us in petty fines. She wants to break me," Tobias muttered. "But all she's doing is proving my point." That evening, the neighborhood's simmering tension boiled over. Tobias was in his driveway cleaning the SUV when Roger Kim walked up, his expression anxious. "She's calling for a special HOA vote," Roger said quietly. "Wants the board to consider removing your charger altogether, says it's unsafe and has already damaged property." Tobias wiped his hands on a rag. "So now she's rewriting history. Her Tesla fried because she stole my power, and somehow that's my fault?" Before Roger could answer, Priscilla's voice rang out from across the street. She was standing with 2 neighbors, gesturing wildly toward Tobias's house. "He's dangerous!" she shouted, loud enough for half the block to hear. "He tampered with his equipment. He could have set the whole street on fire." Tobias dropped the rag and marched toward her. "Stop lying, Priscilla! You broke the law by stealing from me, and now you're trying to spin it. You're not protecting this community. You're tearing it apart." The small crowd around her murmured. One neighbor, an older man named Arthur, stepped forward. "Priscilla, I've lived here 20 years. I've never seen Tobias cause trouble, but I've seen you slap people with fines for every little thing. Maybe you should look in the mirror." Gasps and mutters spread. Priscilla's face flushed red, her composure cracking for just a moment before she snapped back. "Arthur, if you don't like how the HOA is run, you're free to move." The street fell silent. For years, no one had dared challenge her so openly. Now the dam was starting to crack. Later that night, Tobias's phone buzzed with messages from neighbors. Some offered support, some warned him to tread carefully, and a few outright threatened to take action if their property values were put at risk by his feud. Tobias sat at the kitchen table, reading them out loud while Marlene paced. "This is exactly what she wants," Marlene said. "Divide everyone. Make it look like you're the problem, not her." "I'm not going to let her win," Tobias said firmly. "She's used fear for too long. If this neighborhood has to split in 2 for the truth to come out, so be it." The following weekend, the HOA held another meeting. The community center was packed, voices raised before the session even started. Priscilla stood at the front again, pointing to a stack of printed complaints. "This resident," she said, practically spitting the words, "has created a hostile environment. He has endangered community property and refuses to comply with regulations. For the good of our neighborhood, we must consider stronger action." Tobias rose to his feet, holding up his own folder. "And here's the proof of who really created the hostile environment." He handed out stills of Priscilla plugging into his charger, each time-stamped, each undeniable. "She stole from me, retaliated when I confronted her, and now she's weaponizing the HOA to silence me." The room broke into chaos. Some shouted for her resignation, others demanded Tobias be fined. A shouting match erupted between 2 residents in the back row until a board member banged a gavel to restore order. When the meeting adjourned, nothing had been resolved. No votes, no decisions, just more division. Neighbors spilled into the parking lot, arguing in clusters, voices rising into the night. As Tobias walked to his SUV, Marlene at his side, she whispered, "This is spinning out of control." He tightened his grip on the folder. "It has to. People need to see who she really is. And if it takes a fight to do it, then I'm ready." But Tobias didn't know that the fight was shifting, because now the battle wasn't just about him and Priscilla. It was about the entire neighborhood choosing who they trusted more. The morning after the explosive HOA meeting, Tobias noticed something he hadn't seen in weeks. Neighbors starting conversations without lowering their voices. People weren't whispering behind closed doors anymore. They were talking openly, and more importantly, they were talking about Priscilla. Donna Myers was the first to stop by his driveway. You've got people on your side, Tobias. More than you think. After last night, folks aren't scared of her the same way. Tobias frowned. What do you mean? Donna lowered her voice. Word's getting around. People are telling their own stories now. How she fined the Johnsons for painting their shutters the wrong shade of blue. How she threatened to report the miller's kid for riding his skateboard on the sidewalk. She's made enemies, Tobias. And now that she's exposed, they're finally speaking up. By noon, the neighborhood group chat, usually full of lost pet notices and yard sale ads, was on fire. Post after post called out Priscilla's heavy-handedness. Some shared scanned copies of ridiculous fines. Others described moments she humiliated them in meetings. A few even admitted they'd stayed quiet for years out of fear of retaliation. Tobias scrolled through the messages, stunned. It wasn't just him anymore. It was everyone. That evening, Roger Kim knocked on his door. He looked exhausted, but there was a determination in his voice. I didn't want to get involved at first, Tobias. But I can't stay quiet anymore. Last year, she threatened to fine me $500 because my son's basketball hoop violated aesthetic harmony. I paid it just to keep the peace. But seeing your footage, it hit me. She's been abusing power, plain and simple. Tobias nodded, gratitude softening his features. Thanks for telling me, Roger. The more people speak up, the harder it'll be for her to twist this. Within days, the momentum snowballed. Neighbors who had once sided with Priscilla began to distance themselves, their loyalty cracking under the weight of shared grievances. The woman who had once controlled the subdivision with threats of fines now found herself cornered by her own track record. The shift became obvious at the next HOA meeting. This time, the atmosphere was different. Instead of hushed respect when Priscilla entered the room, there were murmurs, pointed glances, even a few rolled eyes. When she tried to take the podium, Arthur, the older man who had defended Tobias earlier, stood and raised his hand. Before we listen to another lecture, I think it's fair we talk about the stack of fines people have been bringing me all week. I've seen letters for gnomes, for kids' bikes, for holiday decorations. It's out of control. And if Tobias is telling the truth, and judging by those videos he is, then Priscilla's been stealing while punishing the rest of us. How's that leadership? Applause broke out. Some clapped hesitantly, others with vigor, but the sound filled the room. Priscilla's face tightened. Arthur, you don't know what you're talking about. Every fine I've issued was within the rules. Donna rose from the back. Rules don't mean anything when you only use them to target people. You've turned this neighborhood into your kingdom, and we're all sick of it. The board members shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, they weren't rallying behind her. They were listening to the residents. Tobias seized the moment. He stepped forward, his voice steady. This was never just about my charger. It's about fairness, about respect, about not letting one person use power to control everyone else. I didn't ask for this fight, but I won't apologize for standing up. The room quieted. For once, Priscilla had no immediate comeback. She stood rigid at the podium, her eyes darting across the crowd, searching for support. But fewer and fewer faces met her gaze. When the meeting ended, neighbors surrounded Tobias, clapping him on the back, thanking him for exposing her. Even those who had been skeptical before seemed to realize the tide was shifting. Walking back to his car, Tobias felt lighter than he had in weeks. For the first time, it wasn't just him against Priscilla. The neighborhood was beginning to see through her facade. Marlene slipped her hand into his as they crossed the parking lot. You've turned the corner, she whispered. He gave a small smile. No, we have. Everyone's finally standing up, but the fight wasn't finished yet, because taking away her reputation was one thing, but ensuring lasting change in the neighborhood was another, and Tobias still had one final decision to make. 2 weeks later, the neighborhood gathered once more at the community center off Providence Road. The air felt different this time. There was no buzzing anxiety, no nervous chatter. People walked in with purpose, many carrying folders of old fines and letters as though ready to settle a score. Tobias sat near the middle, Marlene beside him, hands folded tight in her lap. He wasn't sure what would happen tonight, but the weight of the past month pressed heavily on his shoulders. At the front of the room, the HOA board members exchanged glances before the president cleared his throat. Tonight, we will be addressing complaints regarding board conduct. In particular, accusations of abuse of power and misconduct by Treasurer Priscilla Hensley. A murmur rippled through the room. All eyes turned toward Priscilla, who sat stiffly at the front, arms crossed, lips pursed into a thin line. For the first time, she didn't look untouchable. She looked cornered. Residents began standing one by one, recounting their experiences. The Johnsons spoke about being fined for painting their shutters. The Millers described the humiliation of receiving a violation notice for their son's skateboard. Donna Myers read aloud a letter she'd received about her holiday lights, her voice trembling with indignation. Each testimony was another stone laid at Priscilla's feet. Finally, Arthur stood, his deep voice carrying weight. "We trusted you to represent us, Priscilla. Instead, you used your position to punish us while breaking rules yourself. You've lost that trust." Applause filled the room. Even the board members joined in, their faces grim. Priscilla shot to her feet, her voice sharp. "You're all ungrateful. Without me, this neighborhood would fall apart. Property values would plummet. I was the only one willing to keep standards high. And now you want to crucify me because one man couldn't handle a few guidelines?" Tobias rose slowly. The room fell quiet. He held up a folder containing stills of her plugging into his charger. "This isn't about guidelines. This is about hypocrisy. You stole from me, retaliated when I stood up to you, and tried to bury me under false violations. This community deserves better than that." The silence was heavy. Then the board president spoke. "By unanimous vote, the board has decided to remove Priscilla Hensley from her position as treasurer effective immediately. Furthermore, a review committee will be established to reassess past fines and policies." Cheers erupted. Neighbors clapped, some even whistled. Priscilla's face flushed crimson as she gathered her bag and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. For the first time, her power was gone. Tobias sank back into his seat, a wave of relief washing over him. Marlene leaned close, whispering, "It's over." But Tobias knew it wasn't just about the victory. It was about the lesson etched into every sleepless night, every tense confrontation. Standing up to someone like Priscilla wasn't easy. It came with stress, conflict, and risk. But if you let fear keep you silent, people like her would never stop. Later, as Tobias stood in his driveway, neighbors began stopping by. Roger offered a handshake. Donna brought over a plate of cookies. Even Arthur, usually reserved, clapped him on the shoulder. "You did right by all of us," he said simply. Tobias smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone. Everyone had to speak up. That's the only way change happens." That night, as he plugged his SUV into the charger, Tobias stared at the green light, blinking steadily. For the first time, it felt like more than a car charging. It felt like a symbol, proof that boundaries mattered, and that no one, no matter how powerful they thought they were, had the right to trample over someone else. The neighborhood wasn't perfect now, and it never would be. But it was freer, lighter, and Tobias knew one thing for sure: silence would never protect anyone. The lesson was simple, but hard-earned. When someone tries to take advantage of you, standing up isn't just about yourself. It's about everyone who comes after you. And as for Priscilla, she might still glare from across the street, but her grip was broken. The community no longer feared her. And that was worth every sleepless night. If you found this story gripping, make sure to subscribe for more. These aren't just neighborhood dramas. They're lessons in standing up for what's right, no matter the cost.